I want to tell you about something that happened to me a couple years ago. To this day, I haven't told another soul this story, but I'm curious to know what you think of it. I was making a cross-country trip to visit my parents. It was a very dark night as I drove down the winding roads of Connecticut. I was having a pretty good time and was hoping to get to their house before it was too late. I remember as I was going around this wide turn, I saw 3 wild dogs run into the road and stop dead in their tracks. I slammed on the brakes and was able to stop well before hitting the dogs. I sat there watching the dogs for a while as they didn't run off. There they were in the middle of the road, staring at me in the car. I honked at them, trying to encourage them to run away, but they just kept looking at me. About a minute went by, and all 3 of them, with their heads lowered close to the ground, started walking towards me. As they got closer, I realized that these weren't normal dogs or even wolves. They were something else entirely. They had these insane red eyes that glowed brightly in the dark and were huge. They were snarling and growling, and the creatures started spreading out strategically, looking like they were going to try to attack. I had never seen anything like these creatures before in my life. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and a feeling of pure dread washed over me. Even in the safety of my car, I began fearing for my safety as these things meant business. I thought about flooring it towards the beasts, but they were so much bigger than any dog I'd ever seen, and the impact would assuredly render my car undrivable. Seeing no other option, I put the car in reverse and hit the gas. The dogs, or whatever they were, began to run after me, keeping pace with the car easily. No matter how fast I went, they stayed right in front of me, seeming to almost glide across the pavement. They showed no signs of tiring. After a few minutes of this, I came to an intersection and aggressively whipped the car around and tore off down the road. I was able to put some distance between me and the giant demon dogs, and I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me. I considered calling 911, but I wasn't sure if they would believe me or even be able to do anything. After all, how do you explain something like this? Even if they dispatch a police cruiser or animal control, there's no guarantee that they would be able to do anything against creatures like this. I was able to take an alternate route safely to my parents' house, but I never forgot about this encounter. The thing I remember the most about these beasts were their eyes, incredibly wide and as red as embers in a bonfire. I remember looking at their eyes and just knowing I was in danger. I've been encountered by wild animals before, and usually there is an element of fear that you can clearly see. In these black dogs' eyes, there was no fear, and it was clear that they would enjoy killing me. Part of me wondered if it wasn't me they wanted to eat, but my very soul. I've researched these creatures obsessively, and it turns out I'm not the only person to have an experience with these demon dogs. Most people refer to them as hellhounds, and I remember reading about this crazy event back in 1577. During this encounter, apparently a hellhound broke through the door of a church and savagely killed several members of the congregation. It was reported to have even caused the roof of the building to fall to the ground. For centuries, stories of hellhounds have been told along the east coast of England. These fearsome beasts are said to be black with eyes like saucers and often travel in packs led by men on horseback. Though the stories have largely spread through word of mouth, the earliest written record of a hellhound dates to the 11th century. Could these creatures be more than just legend? If you ask me, I don't know what else I could have possibly seen that night. What makes these stories so fascinating is that they have persisted for centuries, despite there being no concrete evidence that such a creature exists. There are many theories as to what the hellhound might be, ranging from a natural phenomenon to a supernatural being. Some believe that the hellhound is simply a product of overactive imaginations, while others believe that it is an omen of death or an otherworldly creature sent to terrorize us. It was particularly strange for me to read that hellhounds could be omens of death, because shortly after I arrived at my parents' house, they informed me that my dad had gotten cancer and only had an estimated 3 months of life left. Unfortunately, the doctors were wrong, and he only lived about another 2 weeks. That was the last time I saw my beloved father. My sister said the morning after he died, a dog had visited her in her dreams, and she knew that he had passed on. The dog in her dream was friendly and not a hellhound, but the similarities still freak me out. I was never particularly interested in the paranormal, but this experience shook me to my core. I've dealt with some evil people in my life, but I've always viewed animals as saintly and innocent. No longer those demon dogs were pure evil, and I believe them to be under the control of Satan himself. I've often wondered why they would come after me. Was it a warning my father was going to die? Was I being punished for something that I did in a previous life? Was it something I did in this life that I haven't repented for? I've had a religious bone in my body, but seeing those ghoulish creatures has made me rethink everything. The house I grew up in was very haunted. I know everyone always thinks, why didn't your family just move out? But it's not as easy as that. My mother inherited the house from her father when he passed away. It was completely paid off, so all we had to pay were the property taxes. We were very middle class. So, moving away and into a new house wasn't really an option. There were a few unspoken rules in the house. Probably the most important of them was never go to the basement alone. The basement was old and musty. There was only one small light installed, and the floors were still dirt. The only reason anyone really needed to go down there was for laundry. Even then, you never went alone. There was constant strange activity in the house. Items would go missing and turn up in strange places. And hearing weird noises at night was normal. My parents tried to cover it up by making up some outlandish explanation. But I always knew the truth. It was manageable most of the time. We could all just ignore it and move on with our life. One day I had just gotten home from school, and both of my parents were at work. I'd been in the living room watching some cartoons, and I thought I heard meowing. I muted the TV and walked around the house looking for the source. I stood next to the basement door and realized the sound had been coming from there. Really, that was no surprise. I hesitated for a moment. I didn't want to go down alone, but I also wanted to see the cat. My childish desire to see the cat took over, and I started walking down the stairs. The meowing got louder as I walked down, and I started trying to call it over to me. I made it to the bottom of the steps, and I looked around. It hit me when I got down there that I didn't know how a cat would have gotten in there anyway. There were no windows or doors for it to have snuck in from, but I was too young to have thought that through in advance. I didn't hear the meowing anymore as I stood at the bottom of the stairs, so now I was creeped out and wanted to go back upstairs and ignore this noise, just like we did with everything else that happened. Then I heard a laugh, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't alone down there. I ran up the stairs and slammed the door behind me. I sat down on the couch and unmuted the TV. I remember panting and hyperventilating because I was so scared, but this was how we dealt with them. We just pretended they weren't there. When my parents came home, I told them what happened. My mother was upset with me for going down there alone, especially when no one else was home. She made me promise never to do it again. About a week or two later, I was home alone again and doing homework on the dining room table. I heard a gently tapping sound on the basement door, and my head perked up. It sounded like something was calling to me, like it wanted me to let it out of the basement. I ignored it and went up to my room so I couldn't hear it. Later that night, I'd had a bad dream. I woke up and walked to the kitchen to get a drink of water. While I was in the kitchen, I heard a soft creaking noise and turned around to see the basement door ajar. My heart sank when I saw it. I didn't want to walk past it to go back to my room either, but I had to. I walked past it and pushed it shut as I walked by. But before I could walk away fully, I heard the doorknob jingling. I could see it being turned back and forth forcefully. I jumped when a banging noise came from behind it. I could see the door frame shaking from the force of it. I ran back to my room and hid under the covers of my bed. Nothing happened that I was aware of for the rest of the night, and somehow I fell asleep shortly after getting in bed. The next morning, my mother yelled at me about leaving the basement door open and how I promised I wouldn't go down there. I tried to explain what happened, but she thought I wasn't telling the whole story. She thought I was leaving the part out where I opened the door. After that, the strange activity got much worse. I heard laughing in the hallway while I was trying to sleep. Light banging in the walls. Things moved around a lot more. I found toys and bears broken. It was like something wanted me to let it out of the basement, and I must have. Whatever it was seemed to be fixated on me. I was the one hearing things. And it was my stuff that was missing. Something about its attachment to me felt abnormal. My mother had grown up there and never mentioned anything about it clinging to her. I finally saw the source of all of this one day. It was the middle of the night and I had to use the bathroom. I ran to go as fast as I could. I finished and washed my hands quickly and started back to my room. The hall light was off, so I couldn't see it in great detail, but I saw a figure. A girl. She was young, probably around 10 years old. She looked at me and walked out of the hall to the living room. It looked like she wanted me to follow her, but that was the last thing I wanted to do. I ran into my parents' room and woke them up. My dad walked out and checked on it. The basement door was open, but there wasn't any other sign of her. I keep wondering if she was lonely and just wanted to be my friend. I'm a new park ranger here at Silver Lake State Park, right in the middle of Tennessee. I've been here for 2 weeks and I love it. This is the first time in my life that I have lived somewhere other than New York City. It's beautiful here with all its hills, mountains, trees, and nature surrounding. I feel so blessed to have this job and wake up to this explosion of nature. However, there have been 1 or 2 incidents on this job that I can't quite explain. One day I was in my cabin doing a quick check of the surrounding areas with my binoculars. I was scanning from right to left to right, looking for anything unusual. I stopped when I saw something large and brown in the distance. It looked completely bizarre. It was roughly 6 to 8 feet tall, in the shape and form of a man, but completely covered in brown hair with little patches of white. It seemed to be a man dressed like a dog, but that couldn't be right. The face was completely dog-like, with the face of a wolf. I felt sick to my stomach, wondering if somebody had drugged me or if I was sleep-deprived. I watched this thing through my binoculars, and when it looked up, it stared right at me, right in the eyes. Immediately, I fell back off my chair onto the floor, spilling my coffee everywhere. The next thing I knew, my manager came in and asked if I was okay. I debated about whether I should tell him the truth or not, and I decided to reveal everything. When I told him, he simply rubbed his chin, looked serious, and walked to the window, staring out into the vast expanse of forest and land. "There's something out there that scares me," he said. I didn't know exactly what he meant, but I took it to mean that he had encountered this thing before, or had at least heard reports of its existence. At least I wasn't completely crazy. I'm pretty sure I've seen this creature again a few days ago, but it disappeared quickly, as if to escape from my stare. This hasn't taken away my love for this job. If anything, I want to know more. What's out there? Maybe I've discovered some new species, but a part of me feels like I've encountered something terrible, something dark that has the power to do terrible things. Getting my diving certification has to be one of my proudest moments. It also led to one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had. Despite having all the safety gear and precautions in place, I couldn't have prepared for this discovery. Recently, had the opportunity to visit Indonesia. In Indonesia, there are many dive locations, ranging from popular to little known. I did some research and chose to explore the ancient seabeds. The spot is well known to the locals. They swim and wash there, but beneath the surface, a limestone bedrock housing fossils of sea life that is 100,000 years old. It was an opportunity to visit ancient coral and caves galore. My dive team consisted of 4 experienced divers. We were all incredibly excited. We had all the precautions in place and we planned to set out on our expedition early in the morning. I couldn't wait to get out there. I hardly slept the night before from the anticipation. I had my lights, my guidelines, and equipment all ready. I was loading up to travel when my diving partner called to tell me he couldn't make it. He had been vomiting the night before. Normally divers pair up, for safety, but we now had an uneven number. I had the most dive experience, so I would go solo. But my plan was to stay near the others in case something went wrong. I had no idea how wrong it would really go. How it would change my overview of diving in the future, and the fact that I can never unsee what I saw in those caves. The initial dive itself was pretty stellar. Everything went well, and we found exactly what we had been hoping to see. But when I delved deeper into the crags and canyons below, I came across a dark, dry cave. I broke the number one rule. While the other divers explored some of the coral on the walls, I turned down a different section and discovered a cave. It was enormous at the opening, but it funneled down smaller and smaller. I managed to squeeze through and came into a big open space. It was mostly dry with some pits maybe 3 feet deep. Because could stand, I got my filming equipment ready and shot some footage. I kept hearing clicking, scratching above the sounds of the water outside, but they were indistinguishable as to what direction they were coming from. All sounds reverberate in a cave. It was beautiful inside, all the grooves and cuts in the walls from the flowing water over centuries. I remember standing back and taking it all in. This was unlike anything I had ever seen on a dive. I felt like I was hiking a cavern in the Midwest. There were jagged stalagmites I had to navigate around. Some of the stalactites nearly reached the floor, they hung so low. It looked like an ice castle. It was glorious. I shot photos and footage for a long time, hoping to show just how beautiful and enormous this cave really was. I heard scratching right above me and clicks. I swore I saw movement, but when I jerked my camera upward, it went crashing to the cavern floor. A stalactite narrowly missed my face. Something had jarred it loose. My very expensive photo equipment lay shattered on the ground at my feet. I didn't have much time to mourn its loss. Something was moving on the ceiling. Fearing the worst, I attempted to scoop up the remains of the camera. If that giant calcium salt icicle came down from water pressure, this cave could become flooded very fast. Water began to pool around me. It was ankle deep in no time at all. It was silently seeping down from above me. I needed to get out. My carelessness about leaving my group and need for adventure had put me in a life-or-death situation. I started to panic. Everything around me looked the same: calcium crystals, muddy water. I couldn't remember which way I had come in. I saw movement above me once again and heard clicking. Another massive stalactite fell behind me. I looked up. Something was crawling on the ceiling. I caught it out of the corner of my eye as it scrambled behind a massive crystal. I stupidly said, "Hello?" But my voice was muffled from my equipment and fear dragging a lump down my throat. A huge chunk of the ceiling fell just feet from me. That got me in gear. I needed to get out. I needed to find the exit I had squeezed through. I made my way to the wall and started looking for the hole I had come in through. Something was moving on the massive ceiling above me. When I looked up, I immediately stumbled back. This naked-looking thing on 4 legs was clinging to the wall. It was pale and covered in veins. My light found it and I fell to the floor. Its face looked gaunt and horrible. There was a gaping hole of a mouth and big black eyes. I screamed and choked on my own breath. The creature began to descend down the wall with lightning speed. It was coming toward me, clicking and scraping huge trails down the wall as it moved. It moved so fast. Chunks of calcium were raining down on me as I felt around on the wall looking for the way out. The creature was maybe 20 feet away. It looked incredibly human, but insane and horrifying. Somehow I found the hole in the wall I had come through. I squeezed through it. I stumbled into the pool and swam for my life, back to the boat. I have swam with sharks. I have jumped out of airplanes, but I have never been so scared in my life. That thing wasn't human. I honestly don't know what it was. The piece. Then we heard a terrible scream coming from deep in the forest. We radioed in that we heard the scream and were going into the woods to investigate. We grabbed our flashlights and started making our way towards the scream. There wasn't much noise after that. We just took our time and slowly made our way deeper into the woods. The forest was weirdly quiet, and it felt like something was wrong. We both stopped walking and just stood in the middle of the forest to see if we could hear anything. Suddenly, we heard a scream so loud that it hurt both of our ears. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It was human-like, but much more bellowing and with more of a growl to it. I looked to my left and I saw the most terrifying creature I've ever seen in my life. It was freakishly tall, standing on its hind legs and about 7 feet tall. It had glowing blue eyes and looked like a wolf, but much larger and more muscular. Its face was menacing, like a cross between a wolf, an ape, and a demon. It charged right at me, and I dove out of the way to avoid being trampled to death. I heard gunshots, and when I looked, I saw my partner fire several rounds into the creature. It swung at my partner, and he jumped out of the way inches from being butchered. I shot it in the back of the head, and it whipped around, looked me right in the eyes, and howled at me. I ran away as fast as I could towards the campsite and heard my partner screaming behind me. I couldn't just leave him back there to get mauled, so I took off towards his cries. When I met back up with him, he was halfway up a tree, and he pointed in the direction the creature ran off in. We both started running out of the forest, and we heard the creature's scream once again. It was still very much alive. We gathered up everything from the campsite, shoved it in the van, and got the hell out of there. When we were filing the report, we got a visit from a man in a suit from the U.S. Department of the Interior. When we told him what happened, he repeated the story back to us, but insisted that we report it as a rabid bear. We explained to him that it wasn't a bear. Its eyes glowed yellow, and it looked like a wolf and ape mix. We told him it was over 7 feet tall, and it screamed like a human. He simply nodded, and then after a pause, he insisted again that the encounter we had was with a rabid bear. He also congratulated us on successfully killing the creature. I explained to him that we didn't kill it, and it was still running wild in the forest. He then got very stern with me and said that if I valued my job, freedom, and life, I would put that we killed the rabid bear causing all the issues. It was a disturbing moment. He ripped up the initial report and said that he looked forward to reading about what happened to us in the forest. Then he left. I was terrified and pissed off. There was something seriously dangerous in our backyard, and the government wouldn't let us get the help we need to get rid of it. It made me question all the information I've ever received in my entire life. If they're powerful enough to make victims of a paranormal creature lie, what else were they capable of? They're in charge of our schools. What are they brainwashing children to believe? They censor information on the internet. What don't they want us to know? I lied on the report, and so did my partner. Under threat of losing my job, being thrown in jail, and even being killed, we were forced to lie about the most traumatic moment of our lives. I quit shortly afterward, and I won't go near a government job ever again. If that happened to me, how many innocent people are out there getting bullied by the government? Is the government responsible for releasing a creature like that into the wild? I ask myself questions that keep me up at night, and I wish this never happened to me. But it did happen to me, and I am forever changed as a result. Any insight would be greatly appreciated. As a park ranger, I've had quite a few experiences that made me question everything I know. We are not alone out there, and there is life after death. I could go on and on about every experience I've had, but I'll tell you about a recent one that seriously wigged me out. I was instructed to remove this invasive plant species that was wreaking havoc on our native foliage. I was deep in the woods digging up the roots of this damn weed when I heard a loud cry in the distance. Hearing animal noises certainly isn't uncommon, so I didn't pay it much mind at first, but the more I heard it, the more it sounded like a wounded puppy crying out for help. It got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore, and I just had to rescue this poor little puppy. I kept hiking in the direction I heard the cries. It took me far into the forest off the paths that I'm familiar with, and I kept walking deep into the woods towards the sound. I eventually wandered into an Ahwanachi camp, and I started asking if there was a wounded animal around. Nobody knew of any, so I just kept searching. Finally, a man asked me what it sounded like, and I said it sounded like a wounded puppy. I explained to him that I'd been searching for well over an hour, and it sounds like the puppy is just around the corner, but I can't find it anywhere. He had me sit down, and he gave me this delicious concoction to drink. He told me that the sound I was hearing was not a dog. It was a sound that he had heard several times before. He told me that several years earlier, a boy had drowned in a lake nearby. Ever since then, his ghost has haunted the lake and has become a deathly presence. Once an innocent boy crying for help, now he cries to lure people to him. When people reach out to help him get out of the lake, the boy grabs them by their legs and pulls them underwater to drown them to death. Being skeptical, I explained to the man that it wasn't a boy's cries I heard, it was a wounded puppy crying for help. The man was persistent, and he insisted that I should never trust the boy. He said that everyone who has ever gone to the lake to help the boy has died, and if he was calling to me, that meant that I was next. I didn't believe it for a second and was getting frustrated by this point. I just went hours out of my way to help an animal, and it wasn't about to be in vain. Suddenly, I heard the cry again. "See, that's the sound I've been hearing," I shouted. The man just shook his head. "I've heard that cry many times in my lifetime. I've lost many people to that cry. All I can do is warn you. It's up to you to do what's best for you." The man walked away, and I was left with a choice. Do I listen to some fairy tale and let a helpless animal die, or do I go rescue it so I can get back to dealing with the weeds? I followed the cry for another 15 minutes or so, and sure enough, I ended up at a lake. It was gorgeous, located right in between two mountains. There are some incredible sights at Yosemite National Park, but this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. There were trees surrounding the lake and endless mountain views as far as the eye could see in every direction. Finally, I heard the cry crystal clear, but this time it sounded different. There was a strange element to the cry. It was almost like whatever was crying was trying to hold back laughter. I looked around and there wasn't any creature that I could see. The sound kept getting louder and louder, and I panicked. I thought about everything the man had said, and the sound I heard wasn't a cry for help, but clearly something toying with me. Something evil. I turned around and ran as fast as I could. I was terrified. I could still hear the laughter in the distance as I sprinted back towards the Awanechi camp. I finally made it, and I told the man I spoke to earlier everything that had happened. He told me, "If you hear the cry again, ignore it and do whatever you can to get it out of your mind. The boy preys on your compassion and fear, and if you let him, he will drive you to drown in the lake just to escape the torment in your mind." I told a fellow park ranger about this, and he told me of a legend called the Grouse Lake Ghost. People hear his cries and then end up drowning in the lake. This freaked me out that it was a known phenomenon, and I thought about how close I got to the lake. I must say, the lake is absolutely gorgeous, and it is something everyone should see before they die. But for God's sake, if you hear crying or laughing, get the hell out of there. Has anyone else experienced this? Has anyone else heard the Grouse Lake Ghost? Has anyone experienced something like this? Please let me know. I want to share an experience I had in West Virginia where I grew up. It happened a few years ago when I went home to visit. I live in Ohio now, but I was raised in the Little Kanawha River Basin. I did most of my hunting near Orlando. Great spot for coon hunting. So I was home in the fall that year. I think it was around Thanksgiving. Since I was visiting, I didn't have my dogs with me, but my brother Ted hunts too. Kind of runs in the family. We had planned to hunt together that night, but he and his girl had gotten in a spat and all he wanted to do was sit home and mope about it. I couldn't convince him to come out with me, but he told me to just take the dogs out myself. So I did. Now Ted's got blue ticks, a pair of them named Nate and Jonesy. Myself, I keep Walker hounds, but everyone has their favorites. Nate and Jonesy were pretty excited to load up, you know. It's funny. Dogs always know when you're taking them out for a hunt. There's a spot on Oil Creek where I usually park and let the boys out. It's best if you let them run a bit to get it out of their system. A good hound knows when it's time to quit playing. Ted's dogs are well trained too. As soon as I whistled and started walking down the river trail, they got down to business. After a couple of false leads, suddenly Jonesy gets the scent and starts baying. I gave him his head and he took off with Nate on his heels. I heard them tree something up ahead and thought, boy, that didn't take long. It was a clear night with a good moon, and sometimes that brings good luck. I mean, probably it's just that the coons are more active or something. But I always do better when the moon's bright. I got to where they were, practically trying to climb that damn tree themselves, and told them to stand down. I shined my light up in the branches and didn't see a thing. I was surprised because this didn't seem like a false lead, the way they were carrying on. So I kept shining, walking around the tree, thinking there had to be a coon up in there somewhere. And that's when I saw it. Damn creepiest thing I've ever seen. My light caught the edge of this black leathery wing, kind of like a bat's wing, only it was huge. I mean, it had to have been 4.5 feet long, maybe 2 feet wide. Seriously, I didn't even understand what I was seeing at first, but it had those, what do you call them? Ribs? Those things that divide the wing into sections, like a bat's wing has. I was so startled, I almost dropped my light. I think I might have said holy crap or something, and then the wing moved, and I saw the rest of it. Okay, this is the crazy part. It looked like a human's body, but smoother. I mean, it had a head and a torso and legs, not like a bird. It was all one color except for the wings, like a medium gray. I couldn't see its feet, but its head was small in proportion to its body, and it must have been scared, because the head was tucked down to its chest, like it was hiding. At this point, the dogs are getting restless and starting to whine. I snapped out a command to hush, and that's when the thing looked up. Total freak show. Its face was a pale gray, almost white, and it was blank. I guess that's the best way to describe it. I was shining the light right on that sucker, and I'm telling you, it didn't have features like a nose or a mouth, just eyes, I get you. And the eyes were small and glowing red, like them toy bats they sell at Halloween where the eyes light up when you flip a switch. Okay, so I took a shot at it. I know some of you are going to be angry and argue the thing might have been peaceful, but I was acting on pure instinct. The creature was so damn unnatural, and I admit I was kind of nervous. I didn't know what the hell it was going to do, so I raised my rifle and took a shot. I must have missed. I say must have because the thing took off, just leapt out of the tree and sailed away in the night. I tried to follow it with my flashlight, and that beam's pretty strong, but I couldn't track it. It was gone. I don't know how I missed it. I was right below it, maybe 18 feet away, tops. Should have been an easy shot. I came back the next day and looked around in the daylight for some sign of it, feathers or weird blood or something. Didn't find anything. I told my brother Ted about it, and he just laughed at me. Asked if I'd been drinking. He can be an ass sometimes. But I know what I saw, and I'm not afraid to talk about it. I've told a few other hunters I know, and you know hunters see a lot of strange stuff out there when the rest of the world is asleep. Then, last winter, I was talking to a guy trading hunting stories. When I brought up seeing a creature in West Virginia that looked like a giant human bat, he told me about the Mothman. Turns out his brother-in-law had a similar story hunting in Pennsylvania. He said that poor guy was so freaked out seeing that thing up in a tree by the swamp that he turned tail and ran. Made me feel good. Not just that someone else had seen the same thing, but also that I was brave enough to try to take it down. I'm a doctor, and I'm constantly at the hospital working day and night. Honestly, I see strange things all the time and must shrug it off and keep working. But there was one experience that will always haunt me. If you'd ask me publicly if I believe in anything that hasn't already been proven with science, I'd say no. But your channel has given me an opportunity to talk about something that has deeply confused me. I was checking on a patient who was experiencing chronic headaches. She kept chanting that they were in control. I had the nurse administer her some pain meds and recommended she be sent to the psych ward. She had no opposition to her recommended treatment, but was adamant that she didn't want to be left alone. When I asked her who they were, she told me that they were reptile demons, and that they were going to harvest her soul if she wasn't careful. She said that they had been tormenting her for years, and that she had been trying to fight them off, but they were too strong. I tried to comfort her and assure her that we would take care of her, but she pleaded with me to not leave her alone. I spoke with the nurses, and we decided to keep a close eye on her and have someone always stay close to her. We also increased her pain medication to help ease her symptoms. I kept in touch with her over the next few days, and she seemed to be improving a lot. She wasn't as agitated and was starting to relax a bit. The nurses reported that she hadn't been having any strange or out-of-the-ordinary hallucinations recently. She even started to develop some relationships with some of the other patients in the psych ward. It's possible that whatever was causing her headaches was also causing the hallucinations, but without further testing, we couldn't say for sure. I advised her to continue taking the pain medication and to let the nurse know if she started experiencing any more hallucinations or if her headaches worsened. One day, as I was walking by her room, I saw these menacing shadows on the wall next to her bed. I stopped dead in my tracks and walked backwards to confirm what I was seeing. What I saw next still gives me chills to this day. A lizard creature looked me right in the eyes. It was almost 7 feet tall, and its skin looked scaly and shiny. It had huge claws and these yellow, cat-like eyes that seemed to pierce my soul. I tried to run, but it felt like my feet were glued to the floor. The last thing I remember before passing out was its forked tongue flicking in and out of its mouth. When I came to, the nurses were gathered around my bed with concerned looks on their faces. They asked me what happened, and all I could do was tell them to check on that patient's room. A security guard later explained to me that the patient was nowhere to be found, and her sheets were ripped to pieces and covered in blood. We never saw or heard from that patient again, and we had to call her family and explain that she had left the building and we were actively looking for her. To this day, the family is still searching for her, but my intuition tells me that nobody will ever see her again. Did the reptile demon succeed in harvesting her soul? The skeptic in me wants to say that she lost her mind, scratched herself furiously, ran out of the hospital, and killed herself somewhere. But my intuition tells me that the reality is downright unexplainable. I keep trying to tell myself that I simply saw the reptile demon because my patient had mentioned it earlier and I hallucinated. I keep trying to tell myself that I was overworked, saw some things that weren't there, and collapsed from exhaustion. That's just not how I experienced it, and I can still make out every detail of the lizard creature. I haven't even told my spouse that this happened to me, and I really thought I was going to take this experience to my grave. Do I think there are aliens out there, a Bigfoot in the woods, and an afterlife? I still say no, as there is insufficient evidence for all the above. Do I think there are lizard people roaming around pulling the government's strings? Absolutely not. It simply sounds too absurd and made up. Do reptilians exist in any capacity? I would say no, they don't. Did I see a lizard creature in my patient's room? Undeniably, yes. That's why it bothers me so much even today. Everything I know and believe tells me that what I saw I shouldn't have seen. But I remember it like it was yesterday, and now when people share their paranormal experiences, my ears perk up. I feel it necessary to include that I'm not on any medication and wasn't on any at the time of my encounter with what my patient referred to as a reptile demon. I hadn't seen anything like that before this event and haven't seen anything that out of the ordinary since. I don't expect to see anything this strange ever again, but the hospital has never felt the same to me since. My patients are always sharing the craziest stories with me of what goes on in their rooms, and I want to share my experience with them and let them know they aren't crazy. I never will, though. If I was in the hospital and my doctor said he saw a 7-foot lizard creature in my room, I wouldn't hesitate to find another doctor. I have something that I rarely tell people because it's awful, and it took me years to process it. I'm a hard-working, salt-of-the-earth type of man. I don't have time nor the desire to watch ghost shows and play with demon boards or whatever they're called. I have a business to run. I've owned a successful pest control company for 15 years now and am proud to have built it from the ground up. I started with nothing and now have 50 employees and a near impeccable customer satisfaction rating. Donovan, if you have pests, I'll hook you up for free, Chief. The incident I referred to happened when, in the first couple years, I started my business. I got a call from an elderly woman later who complained about having a fly infestation. Elderly people always tug at my heartstrings because my grandparents raised me, and they didn't have a lot of money. We had cockroaches, fleas, mice, and all kinds of pests in that tiny trailer they raised me in, so I can't turn the elderly down no matter how bad the job is. Fly infestations typically mean the job will be nasty. Flies breed and feed in filth like trash, feces, spoiled food, and that kind of thing. I was expecting the worst, but willing to do my best for this woman in need. I drove over to her house, and it was in a nice neighborhood and looked nice from the outside. She had a nice flower garden and a white picket fence that closed in the backyard. The house was probably built in the 1950s, but looked like it was in great shape. But you can't judge a book by its cover, so I anticipated the worst inside the house. I knocked on the door, and the sweetest little old lady answered the door. She mentioned she lived alone, and it was hard for her to go up and down the stairs, so she hadn't been down there in a while. This is what I was expecting to hear, so I told her I would take care of the problem. I asked her if the problem was exclusively in the basement, and she mentioned that sometimes they come up to the main level as well. I did some light routine spraying around to deter bugs from coming up, and sprayed the outside perimeter of the house with some heavy-duty bug killer. Now it was time to go downstairs. I got all my equipment on, went full hazmat, and prepared to walk into the pit of hell. When I opened the door to the basement, I was expecting the smell to be horrendous, but it didn't have much of a smell at all, just damp and old-smelling. I walked down the stairs and turned on the light to the basement. There was lots of non-perishable food, but no real smell. I kept looking around, but didn't find anything out of the ordinary. I also didn't see a single fly. I went upstairs and told the old woman I was going to check up in her attic for bugs. She insisted they were coming from the basement. I told her I wanted to cover all bases and climbed the ladder up into the attic. The attic didn't show any signs of infestation. There was the occasional dead bug, but it was much cleaner than I was expecting. I sprayed some stuff up there just to be safe and headed back down the ladder. I told the old woman I didn't see any sign of infestation, and she said that they only come up at night. Keeping in mind that she was old, I told her that I sprayed and took care of the problem, and that if she had any other issues to let me know. That same night, I got a call from the old lady. She sounded scared and kept yelling, "They're coming, they're coming." I immediately got in my truck and headed to her house. I grabbed my gear and knocked on the front door. She yelled, "Thank God you're here," as she opened the door. She brought me over to the basement door, and sure enough, there were lots of flies gathered around the basement door. I told her to get in the other room because I was going to spray. I sprayed the flies and they dropped dead. I opened the basement door, and all the way down into the basement there were flies buzzing all around. I sprayed as I walked down, killing all the flies. Finally, I got downstairs, and it was absolutely covered in flies. I'd never seen so many flies. I sprayed and sprayed until finally I had to go to my truck and refill my tank. After refilling the tank, I grabbed the vacuum as well so I could suck all the dead flies up. I made my way down the stairs, vacuuming up flies along the way. As I got back in the basement, I must have been vacuuming up hundreds of flies every minute. It was unbelievable. Then all of a sudden, all the lights went out, and I saw a pale, white, glowing girl with long black hair. She had the most wicked look in her eyes. I was in shock, and I yelled, "Get out of here, leave me alone." Then the lights came back on, and she disappeared. I ran upstairs and was going to leave, but the thought of leaving that poor old woman alone with that thing didn't seem right. Plus, I had left all my equipment in the basement. After about 5 minutes of catching my breath, I went back downstairs, finished vacuuming the flies up, sprayed again for good measure, and told the old woman I was finished. About a week later, she called me and thanked me. She said that she hasn't seen a fly since and that she would let her friends know about my services. I hung up the phone and tried not to give it any more thought, but I'll never forget that girl's face. I've only told my closest family this story, nobody else. My dog Gunner was my best friend. Gunner was the best dog I ever had. He was always happy and always seemed to know when I needed some cheering up. He would always come over and lay his head on my lap, and before I knew it, I was smiling again. There were so many things that I loved about Gunnar. He was always so happy. Even if something bad happened, he would always wag his tail and try to make the best of it. Secondly, he was always so gentle. He never once bit or growled at anyone, even when other dogs were trying to start a fight. He was always so smart, too. He learned how to do so many tricks, and he always seemed to understand what I wanted him to do without any trouble. I could go on for hours about how great Gunnar was, but I think the most important thing is that he made me happy. Whenever I was feeling down, he would come over and make me feel better. He truly was my best friend, and I miss him dearly. One night, he ran into the woods, and I spent hours trying to find him. What I saw in the woods that night shook me to the core. I will never be the same. No matter how long I searched or how loudly I called him, Gunnar was nowhere to be found. The forest was quiet and creepy, and every sound made my heart jump, and I constantly scanned the darkness for any sign of my furry friend. Time seemed to be standing still as I wandered through the trees, calling out Gunnar's name. Finally, after hours of searching, I had to admit defeat. I went home heartbroken, not knowing if I would ever see my best friend again. The next day I returned to the woods with my parents. We scoured every inch of those woods, but still couldn't find Gunnar. We put up flyers and contacted all the local animal shelters, but no one had seen him. For weeks, we searched tirelessly for my lost dog, but he was nowhere to be found. Finally, one day, out of desperation, we placed an ad on Craigslist offering a $500 reward for anyone who could find Gunnar. A few nights later, we received a call from someone who had spotted him in a nearby park. We drove over there immediately, but the dog they found wasn't Gunnar. Devastated, I headed back to the house and figured I would take one last look in the woods before saying goodbye to my friend. I got my flashlight, a bag of his favorite treats, and I headed out. The forest was just as eerily quiet every night I'd searched for Gunnar. I screamed for him as loud as I could as I walked deeper and deeper into the woods. I continued to call his name, but there was no answer. The only sound I could hear was the crunch of leaves under my feet. I was about to finally give up when I saw some sort of creature laying on the ground. My heart sank. Was this Gunnar's lifeless body on the ground? I walked slowly towards him, preparing to say my last words. My eyes filled with tears, heartbroken at what I thought was Gunnar. The closer I got to the creature, the more I began to doubt it was Gunnar. Was it a dead deer or something else decaying in the woods? It appeared very skinny and tall, gray in coloration. I assumed it had lost all its hair, but the closer I got, I realized it didn't have any hair at all. Was this a dead person in the middle of the woods? I started shaking as I got closer. It had pale, thin skin and looked somewhat human. As I stood directly over the body, shining the flashlight down on it, I saw that it was completely naked and almost skeletal in appearance. I felt nauseous. This thing wasn't human. Suddenly, the thing turned its head, looked right at me, and started making this unnerving clicking noise. It had hollow black eyes with no nose and a giant mouth. I immediately turned around and ran as fast as I could back to the house. I have never seen anything like that in my life, and that clicking noise still haunts me. To think that thing just lurking in the woods next to my house is enough to vomit. After wondering what the hell that thing could be, I discovered some articles about a creature called the rake. I started by reading all the accounts of people who have claimed to have seen the rake. In doing so, I noticed that there were some patterns in the stories. Many people claimed that the rake had hollow black eyes and was terrifying in nature. I also read accounts of people who had committed suicide after claiming to have encountered the rake. In many of these cases, the victims had left behind suicide notes in which they described the creature in great detail. Humanoid, pale skin, unnaturally skinny and tall, black hollow eyes, and no nose. I don't know for certain if what I saw was the rake, but what keeps me up at night is that my beloved dog might have been killed by that creature. That disturbs me deeply, as he deserved a long life and natural death. I miss Gunnar every day, and I pray I never see that monster in the woods ever again. As I previously stated, I've never told anyone outside my immediate family this. If you've seen something similar, please comment. I know there are a lot of naysayers out there who don't believe in the paranormal, and they think that these creatures don't exist. They think that these events don't take place, but I'm here to tell you they absolutely do, without a doubt. Listening to all of the stories that are sent in makes me feel better about what I experienced. I can't go into great details on where I worked or who I worked for, but this happened in the late 90s. I held an office job for a scientific company. There were 6 of us who worked in the safety processing department. We would process paperwork and approvals for chemicals and materials that were involved with various experiments. The company had several large government contracts which were a major part of the business. It was a very secure location. We all had badges, and the entire facility had tall, barbed wire fencing with gates manned by a security guard that you had to pass through upon entering. It was a hassle to go out for lunch, so most of us would just eat in our little lunchroom. I worked with 5 other people, 3 women and 2 men. We all had similar responsibilities, but I was the manager of that department. Even as the manager, they never gave too much information away on what was going on there. We were fairly close to the testing facility. Outside of our office was this long corridor, and at the end was the entrance to the testing facility. None of us were ever authorized to go in there. It's manned by guards 24/7. Even if some of us would go out to happy hour after work, the guards never came, even after multiple invites. They never associated with us at all. Looking back, they were instructed not to interact with any of the regular employees. The only people who had access to that area were high-level executives, scientists, and the like. I remember one day we were working away, and we hear the breach siren go off. This was the first time that I heard this other than the precautionary drills we ran every 6 months. They were always scheduled, and people knew about them weeks in advance to make sure we complied with safety regulations. This one was the real thing. If something happens in the testing facility and a chemical is leaked, then the siren goes off. Really, any breach of the testing facility that is not planned, the breach sirens go off. As soon as these sirens go off, a coworker of mine, that I will call Jenny, comes running in the door from the corridor side of the office, screaming and completely out of breath. We all huddled around her and asked her what is going on. Keep in mind the siren is going off, so we need to evacuate immediately, but we pause for a second to see what Jenny is so frightened about. She's talking gibberish and is pointing to the corridor. I look at the security monitor in the corner of the office, which is a live view of the corridor, and I see this creature walking down the hallway, and I see both guards lying on the ground. At the time, it was too hard to make out if the guards were dead or not, but I assumed they were. This humanoid creature is walking very oddly, coming down the corridor right towards us. This thing looked demonic, like something straight out of hell. I can't even describe what animal it resembled, because the thing didn't have a face. It looked like it just had a huge mouth, and that was it. It had really long fingers and toes. They looked really odd. From the look I got of this thing, it looked like more than 5 fingers. It stood tall, probably 7 feet, and had these bony legs, but broad shoulders, and its arms were abnormally long. I immediately locked the door and told everyone to evacuate right now. I counted 6 of us, including me at the time, and we went out the opposite side and got to our exit point as fast as we could. There were a bunch of employees outside at that moment because the siren went off for the entire building. Everyone was asking what happened, but my office area was the only one close to the corridor. My boss immediately came over to me and my group and pulled us aside. We met with him and his boss, the director of testing, and they instructed us not to say anything to the other employees, and if something is said, we could be terminated or be held liable for leaking company information. That day, we were all told to go home, and the facility was shut down for 3 days. They blamed it on a gas leak out of the testing facility, but I know what really happened. They created something or were doing tests on something that already existed. I quit a few months after the incident, and a lot of my team did too. That place was eventually shut down around 2010. I was volunteering as a camp counselor on a really nice lake in upstate New York. I loved camp when I was a kid, so I figured it would be nice to give back. Hanging out with the youth of today and seeing what they were all about seemed like a fun way to spend my summer before going back to university. Part of working at the camp is showing up early and getting everything ready for the campers. There's a lot to get ready. You must bring in all the supplies like food and first aid stuff. There are all kinds of activity stuff, sports equipment, you name it. A lot goes into providing for hundreds of kids over a summer. It was my job to get the water activities set up. There was a lot to do. I was sort of surprised they expected me to get it all done by myself. The van was full of bags and cones and buoys and a bunch of other stuff. I dragged bags of stuff to the lake and put everything in order. It took like 10 trips. The sun was setting and dusk was settling in. It was going to be dark soon. I thought it was time to hurry up and get this done with. I was pulling out all the rope for the boundaries when I noticed something in the water. I saw splashes and ripples. I figured it was fish playing around. It was a lake after all. I ignored it and got back to work. A few minutes later, I heard a big plunk, like someone threw a rock in the lake. The ripples were bigger this time, and they spread along the surface of the water. I looked around to see if someone was messing with me. A practical joke played on the new counselor or something, but there was nobody around. The sun was behind the trees now, and it was getting colder fast. The hairs on my arms were standing up. I looked out at the water again, and it seemed almost black now. I realized the goosebumps on my arms weren't only because I was cold. I was feeling nervous being near the lake alone. I shook my head and told myself I was being ridiculous. And then I heard splashing again. I looked up, startled. I saw something going underwater. I only caught it for a second and I wasn't sure if it was a big fish or something else. Then I saw it again, pushing its head up through the water. It sat there like an alligator. Just the top of its head was exposed. The head was long and slick but scaly. I rubbed my eyes, literally not sure if I was hallucinating, but there it was, whatever it was. I didn't know what to do. I heard when you see a bear, you're supposed to make a bunch of noise. Or maybe you're supposed to stay quiet and back away. I couldn't remember anything. But I felt like it was a threat. The head was pointed straight at me. The head came up. First I saw the long head emerge. It was like a weird alien lizard, black and shiny and slimy. The eyes were the most horrifying part. Those shone like they had their own lights inside them. The thing rose out of the water and kept rising. It stood up on two legs and stared at me. It looked like the creature from the Black Lagoon, like I saw on TV when I was a kid. But the head was long and freaky like a deformed alligator. Its arms were long and thin, and on the end of each were horrifying long claws. They were shiny and yellow. It looked at me, and I swear to God I thought it was grinning. It had row after row of crooked, sharp teeth. Its right leg took one small step forward, and my body took over. I threw the ropes I was holding and ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction of the lake. I tripped and flew forward and almost knocked the wind out of myself. But I got up and kept running. I hid behind stacks of kayaks we had for the campers. I caught my breath and snuck my head around the side to look back at the water. That thing still stood there. It wasn't moving. It just stood there. I thought about yelling for help, but I was afraid the only thing that would come running was that monster in the lake. I heard sloshing in the water. I waited another minute and took one more look. I kept praying it was my imagination. But no, it was there. It looked closer to the shore now. I had to run. I turned and took off again and headed toward the main lodge area. I hoped all the other counselors were there. While I sprinted as fast as I could, I turned over my shoulder to look back at the lake. The monster was lowering itself down. It was slow and methodical, staring at me the entire time. I kept running, and when I turned to face where I was going, I saw a counselor ahead of me waving at me. I bent down to catch my breath. The counselor asked me what I was doing. I took a deep breath and took one more look back at the lake. It was completely still and flat. There was no sign of life at all. The counselor asked me again and asked me if I was okay. I told them I was fine, that I saw something in the lake. They asked me what, and I couldn't tell them the truth. I was too afraid of sounding crazy. I just told them it was nothing, just some fish or something. They looked at me like I was a little crazy anyway. And that's why I'm sharing this story now. I need to know that there are other people who have seen something like this. I need to know I'm not alone. I'm a plumber. Been doing it for over 25 years now. The job's taken me to all sorts of weird and wonderful places, but none were as strange as this place was. A half-abandoned building nestled on the edge of a neglected part of town that was better off forgotten. It was late October. The chill of the fall air was starting to seep in. My boots crunched on the gravel as I pulled up. When I first got the call about a plumbing emergency out there, I thought it was some kind of prank. But the request came from the city office. They said the building was in use for some government stock or something. Who am I to judge? A job is a job. The looming structure cut an imposing figure against the dull gray sky. Its weathered bricks had seen better days, and the windows were boarded up, giving off an eerie vibe. The skeletal trees surrounding it didn't do much to dissuade my growing sense of unease either. It felt quiet, too quiet, like the world held its breath around this place. As I approached the entrance, the smell hit me first, an unpleasant mix of dampness and decay. Not uncommon for old buildings, but this was stronger somehow, more pervasive. A faint chirping of the crickets was the only sound cutting into the dead silence, as if nature itself was afraid to disturb this building. I found the busted pipe in the basement. The water flow had been shut off from the main, but there was a musty smell that hung in the air, an undercurrent of something acrid, almost sulfuric. It was different. It was off. The pipe looked gnashed, covered in scrapes and dents. I figured the building's age was causing the infrastructure to crumble, but something about it didn't seem right. It almost looked like bite marks. I shrugged off the thought, reasoning it was probably some vermin or a raccoon. The basement was in dire need of a cleanup job. Among the dust-cobwebbed corners and scattered debris, I noticed a pile of old furniture shrouded in a thick, moth-eaten cloth. The air felt heavy, oppressive, and despite myself, I felt a chill run down my spine. Kneeling down by the damaged pipe, my flashlight began to flicker. I remember thinking, just my luck. The silence was deafening around me, interrupted only by the low hum of my tools and the sporadic flickering light painting grotesque shadows all around. Suddenly, the temperature seemed to drop drastically. A chill swept through the room like an all-consuming fog, the sort of chill that sinks deep into your bones. That's when I heard it, a low guttural growl echoing from the unseen corners of the basement. It was distant, barely audible, but it was there. A rumbling growl, like that of a dog but deeper, resonating within that cold, quiet basement. But those were thoughts for later. I shrugged both the cold and the growl, attributing it to the wind howling outside. After all, I had a pipe to fix. No sooner had I pushed these unsettling thoughts aside than I heard it again, this time louder, more menacing. A low growling sound that seemed to vibrate through the emptiness. I shook it off once more, but I felt my mind pull itself back to those strange dents on the pipe. The thought of a raccoon making those marks somehow seemed less plausible. I heard the odd sound once more, louder and much clearer than before. It was unmistakably a growl, guttural and menacing. A primal fear began to seep into my veins. That's when I noticed, amongst the rat-infested pile and dust-covered debris, movement, slow but deliberate. An ominous shadow was all I saw, hunched and lurking. Just the sight of the shadow struck me cold. It was huge, easily 7 to 9 feet, and it was not human. Right then, every fiber of my being screamed to bolt, to get away from this place as fast as possible. There, standing in that basement with the damaged pipe and the low growling that hung in the silence, I felt a fear I hadn't felt since childhood. The mysterious creature, the ruined pipe, those growls, it all made a horrific sense. Collecting my nerves, I started to pack up my tools. My mind was ordering my hands to work faster, but icy terror made them sluggish, clumsy. The growling was getting louder and closer. As I finally picked up my tool bag, my flashlight flared back to life, and for a moment, it illuminated the beast behind the growl. I would never forget what I saw. A creature with the look of a hyena, a face that was nothing short of demonic. It had a snarling mouth filled with double rows of razor-sharp fangs and large pointy ears. Its body, hunched on human-like legs, was covered in dark fur. Its chest, wide and powerful, spoke of unnerving strength. I saw the eyes just as my flashlight flickered and died again, intelligent and cold, with an unworldly intensity. In what felt like a purely instinctive response, I turned and fled, leaving all my tools behind. The growls seemed to follow me as I sprinted up the stairs, echoing through the building. I couldn't look back. I threw myself into my van, hit the gas, and got the hell out of there. Months have gone by since that chilling encounter, but its memory is as fresh as if it happened yesterday. I can still feel the cold dread when I remember that night, in the basement with that thing. The damp, musty smell, sulfuric, almost like wet dog mixed with rotting meat. The chilling echo of that growl, and the way it looked at me. Every time I pass by an old forgotten building, I feel an involuntary shudder. An intense sense of wariness washes over me. City officials dismissed my claims, saying wild animals were normal for abandoned structures. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But one thing's for sure, not a single person has been able to explain the strange destruction of that pipe. Now, I can't help but wonder what else might be lurking out there, in the shadowy corners of forgotten places, living, existing amongst us. The thought shakes me with a startling realization. Sometimes, the most disturbing things hide where no one thinks to look, just like that half-abandoned building. I have a story from my time as a state police officer in northwestern Montana. There were a few odd situations over the years, but nothing compares to this. I was sent out to a rural homestead to investigate a complaint of property damage and potential theft. The homestead was an off-grid cabin about as deep in the mountains as you could get, while still having access to a halfway decent road in the winter to make it to and from town. The couple that lived there were odd, to say the least. They were mostly self-sustainable out there. They raised a few farm animals and grew a lot of their own food and stored it over the winter in a root cellar. It was nearing the end of fall, and most of the mountain roads were closed for the winter. The drive up to the cabin was a little hairy, but I made it okay. When I arrived, the only thing I knew was that something happened involving the root cellar, but I waited for them to tell me their story, and it was quite the story at that. It began last summer. They noticed food going missing from their garden. They figured it was the local wildlife and installed a fence around the garden. But food continued to disappear. The garden was done for the season, but I checked the fence. It was 8 feet tall and there were no signs of animals getting through or under the fence. The only way into the garden was through a gate, and the couple both said they never once found the gate unlatched. They installed a mess cover on top of the fence to prevent any birds or animals that could climb the fence. There was truly nowhere that an animal could get through this fence. Now, wildlife eating through people's gardens is definitely a problem out here, but it wasn't something you'd call the police for. After harvesting the garden and moving everything into the root cellar, someone or something began breaking in and stealing food from there. And here is where it gets weird. There were no signs of any animals, no prints, no scat. The door to the root cellar was not damaged in any way, but there was a significant number of things missing. They told me that pretty much everything in there was stored in various sizes of mason jars. All the jars were missing. Nothing was knocked on the ground, just vanished. If the food thief was an animal of some sort, we'd expect to see jars on the ground and things damaged or broken in the cellar, but there was none of that. The man just looked at me. I could tell he wanted to speak, but something stopped him. I told him to go ahead, that I've probably heard stranger theories. He told me he had been watching the root cellar through the window every night for the past 2 weeks, and he finally saw the culprit. He said it was a human, but it wasn't a normal human. He didn't know whether to call the police or Fish and Wildlife. I asked him to elaborate, and he said he saw the thief heading to the cellar just after dark, and it was definitely a person. The lack of outside lights made it difficult to see, but he went outside to confront the suspected food thief and scare him off. He met him coming out of the cellar carrying a leather bag full of mason jars. The man said he was human, but he wasn't human like we were. He had a large brow ridge and deep-set eyes. His face and body were square-shaped, and he was only maybe 5 feet tall. He was wearing boots and clothes that appeared to be made from fur and animal hide. The man said it was like looking at some prehistoric history book. He yelled at the thief, and it took off running towards the forest, but before it did, it reached into its bag and tried to hand the man something. He didn't take it, but a person or creature or whatever dropped it on the ground and ran. He followed the thief to the edge of the forest, but it was too dark to try to track whatever it was. He went back to inspect the root cellar and see what all had been taken. It was at that moment that he looked on the ground for what the creature tried to offer him. There were arrowheads, spear points, and a couple of other stone tools. I had absolutely no idea what to do about this case. I took the arrowheads for evidence, but I didn't have anything else to go on. We couldn't find a trail in the forest to even attempt to track the creature. I was straight with the couple. I told them there wasn't much I could do here. They asked if anyone else in the area had seen these people. The man was convinced that there are. I don't know how to say it without sounding crazy, but cave people living out in the mountains, completely isolated from the rest of society. He said he wasn't sure if they were a separate species of human or not, but that they could be the cause for all the Bigfoot stories in the area. I can't say if I believed him or not. I never saw the creature. I did, however, follow up with the couple in the spring of the year. They were both out working in the garden when I arrived and had expanded it quite a bit, and strangely, they said they weren't having any problems anymore. On my way back to my vehicle, I glanced at the root cellar. The door had a display of arrowheads along the top that wasn't there last fall. I didn't ask any more questions. Looking back, I wished I had, but at the same time, I don't think I was ready to know what exactly lives out there in the mountains. I used to share my weird experience a lot when I was younger. I was naive enough to think some people would believe me, but most of the time they didn't. They just made excuses saying it was dark outside, I was mistaken, or I was tired, so I stopped talking about it. But after hearing your show, I knew I had to share this with you and your listeners. I'm from the lower peninsula of Michigan, the top of the mitten if you know what that means. Up north you'd call it if you're from Detroit. There's not much up here except lakes and trees. It's pretty though, and we get a lot of tourists in the summer. The winters are cold. Everyone except the locals leave, and there aren't that many of us to go around. So, like most rural teenagers at that time, we used to head into the woods and have ourselves a bonfire. It was during one of these bonfires that it happened. This was before cell phones were really a thing, at least not up here yet, so when we were partying, we were cut off from the outside world. Our normal spot was this farmer's field, surrounded on all sides by woods. We learned from the older kids to wait until late fall or early winter to start going there, after the farmer hauled in the last harvest, so we knew there wouldn't be anyone up there. It was sort of a rite of passage in my town. When you were a sophomore or junior, one of the seniors would let you tag along to one of their parties and show you the spot. Nobody got crazy at these things. It was too cold, and we heard too many stories of kids getting lost in the snow and losing fingers to frostbite, but we always had a good time. I'm telling you this because most people brush off what I tell them, saying I was just a young, panicked teenager, but I was in my right mind when it happened. My sophomore year, we were having one of these bonfires in the field. Everything was normal. Everyone was having a good time. We were burning pieces of an old barn and some furniture an old lady left out for trash. My best friend at the time, I'll call him Mike for his anonymity, was grilling up some frozen burger patties next to me in a rusty old charcoal grill we kept out there. Sarah, also not her real name, was standing with us too, chatting away like she always did when we heard a low rumbling growl. I looked towards the sound of the growling, and at the edge of the firelight, I saw two predatory eyes reflecting the fire back at me. I nudged Mike and Sarah and slowly pointed in the direction of eyes, trying not to startle whatever was watching us. We were about 10 yards from the nearest group of partygoers. Sarah was terrified, and she walked slowly backwards to them. She never took her eyes off the edge of the firelight. I don't even think she took a breath the entire time she walked away. I had the exact opposite reaction. I was fascinated by the glowing eyes in the dark. We had been hearing reports that gray wolves were coming back into the lower peninsula from Canada and Wisconsin for a few years now, but all anybody saw were flashes on trail cams or tracks in the snow. The Fish and Game Commission couldn't even make up their minds if these were real signs of wolves or just people mistaking dogs and coyotes. I was excited at the prospect of being the first person in Lower Michigan to see a wolf in the flesh. I could tell Mike was excited too, because as I slowly stalked forward for a better look, he was glued to my side. Walking up to a potential wolf is a stupid thing to do, but I was young and I could hear the whispers and murmurs behind me as Sarah alerted the rest of the party to what was going on. I couldn't back down now. Everyone was watching. Mike and I were about 7 or so yards away from the supposed wolf by now. I could just barely make out the outline of its head and ears. It looked almost like a large German shepherd, but with a broader snout and wider ears. The growling got lower, more menacing, like it was no longer a warning, but an actual threat. I've heard a million dogs growl, but this was more raspy and guttural, like there was something mismatched between the creature's vocal cords and its chest. Mike stopped moving and turned back. I was scared and wanted to turn back too, but I wanted to be the big man at the party more. The entire party just stared at me in silence. Over the years, that whole incident morphed into a joke about some kid getting scared by the farmer's dog or a coyote. I've even heard a version where it was an unusually large raccoon. I don't blame people. I would probably think the same thing if I wasn't the one who saw it up close. Mike was the only one close enough to really see anything, and he won't talk about it. He changes the subject every time I bring it up, so I stopped asking him about it. Sometimes I wonder if something horrible would have happened if we didn't notice those eyes at the edge of the firelight. Maybe if someone left the party to take a piss or make out in the bushes, this would be an unsolved murder instead of a local joke. Either way, I guess I'm just glad that we're all safe. I've been a nurse for many years, and this happened to me shortly after I became an ER nurse. We had a patient flown in from a car wreck. He was in rough shape, broken limbs, bruises, covered in blood, severe head trauma, you name it. We tried to save him, but he died in the operating room. They declared his time of death, and we started prepping him to get him out of there. All of a sudden, he wakes up and gasps for air. We put him under and treated him for severe internal hemorrhaging. It was honestly a miracle he survived the surgery. Afterwards, he went into a coma, but he was alive. A couple weeks later, I went to check his vitals and fluids. I kid you not. He woke up, looked me right in my eyes, and started moving. He started flailing and panicking, so I called for help. We put him back under and removed his feeding tube and everything. He stabilized a little later and was in awful shape, but he was very much alive and alert. We put him on a morphine drip and had to cast him up, but he looked like he was on the long road to recovery. His family came to visit him. He was eating regularly. He maintained a positive outlook, and he was doing pretty good. One day I came in to check on Miracle Man. That was my nickname for him. He seemed like he was pretty good, and I was about to check on the next patient when he asked me something. Do you believe in heaven and hell? I wasn't the type to waste time on things I couldn't understand, so I just responded, either something happens or nothing happens. Either way, we die. The next day I checked on him again, and he brought up the subject again. He explained that he always believed in an afterlife, but now he believes in heaven and hell. I told him that if I had died on the operating table and come back to life, I might feel the same way. I saw it, he said to me. I felt it. I asked him to explain what he meant, and he said, I felt the heat. I heard the screams. I saw it. I saw hell. I tried to put him at ease and told him he just underwent a tremendous amount of stress and probably hallucinated. His words stuck with me, though. I saw him dead for several minutes. Is it possible his soul left the earth and he saw hell? He requested to be wheeled into the hospital chapel several times a day and became obsessed with what he saw and experienced. Every time I'd visit him, he'd talk about how he didn't want to go back to hell and wanted to turn his life around before it was too late. A few months later, he eventually turned a corner and improved further. He left without many complications and is still doing well. That man found God and became a minister. He felt he needed to uphold something he saw when he died, so he dedicated his life to do well and do good. We still keep in touch, and sometimes I'll go to his services. Do you think what he saw was... It was my job to keep the government's secrets, but what I witnessed was something that I could never keep hidden. I worked for the government for years, and in that time, I saw a lot of things that the public wasn't meant to know about. Classified programs, secret experiments, you name it. But nothing prepared me for what I saw one day in the top secret files. I was going through the latest batch of documents that had come in when I came across a file marked "Do Not Open." Of course, my curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside, I found a file on a program that the government was running on cryptid creatures. They were studying them and trying to figure out how to use them for their own purposes. I was shocked. I had always thought that the government was trying to keep these creatures hidden from the public, but instead they were using them for their own gain. I wanted to know more, and so I started doing some digging. I quickly realized that this was a huge cover-up, but also one that was very dangerous. Or at least, dangerous for me to have found this out. The papers listed the location of the program, and I knew that if I went there, I could get more answers. So that's what I did. I snuck into the facility late at night and made my way to the lab where they were keeping the creatures. What I saw there horrified me. They were torturing them, experimenting on them in ways that no living creature should ever have to endure. I knew that I had to get out of there and expose this program to the world. But first, I had to make sure that I wasn't being followed. I went into hiding and started putting together all of the evidence that I had found. It was time to blow the lid off of this government conspiracy. But instead, this is what happened next. I was getting ready to go public with my story when I was suddenly attacked. I don't know who did it or why, but they were after my evidence. I fought back as best as I could, but they took everything from me. My memory of that night is fuzzy, but the next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital. The doctors told me that I had been hit on the head and was lucky to be alive. The police were called, and they asked me what happened. I told them everything, but they didn't believe me. They said that I was just delirious from the injury and that there was no such program. I knew that they were lying, but I had no proof. My evidence was gone, and there was nothing I could do to expose the truth. I was forced to keep silent and watch as the program continued operating in secret. The creatures were tortured and experimented on, all in the name of science, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. So here I am now, years later, telling my story in the hopes that someone will finally believe me and expose this program to the world. It's time for the truth to be revealed. The government can no longer keep this a secret. The world needs to know what is really going on. My name is Daryl, and I'm a psychology student at Temple University. I'm fascinated by how the human mind sees monsters in the shadows, but I've never been a big believer in the existence of legendary animals or the supernatural. However, this summer I had my own strange encounter that is making me rethink my past assumptions. I've gone over the encounter again and again in my head, and no amount of rationalization or psychological theories can explain the physical evidence I encountered. I want to tell myself that I didn't see anything supernatural, just a mundane animal that my adrenaline-fueled mind saw as demonic. But I was not alone in this encounter, and the person with me described what I saw in perfect detail. I admit I was terrified by what I saw, but the scholar in me is persistent, and I made sure to have her write down what she saw before we spoke about it. I didn't want to risk talking about it first and tainting each other's memories of the event. Sorry if I sound like a nerd, but this is why I listen to cryptozoology podcasts and YouTube channels in the first place, to understand human psychology. I guess I should give you some backstory. I was at a party 2 months back at a friend of a friend's house in West Philly. I met a cute girl from Drexel who was an engineering major, and we hit it off. It came out in the conversation that she was big into backpacking and wanted to hike the entire Appalachian Trail after she graduated. I grew up camping a lot and being in the outdoors, so I offered to go backpacking with her sometime. Looking back, that is a little bit creepy to offer to take some girl you just met out in the woods all alone, but she was all for it, so we made plans to go the following weekend. I'm not from Philly, so I really didn't know the area, but I heard the New Jersey Pine Barrens weren't too far, and that they were known for being a vast range of wilderness, and I wanted to impress her. A casual hike on a crowded trail didn't seem like enough. So, we headed to South Jersey for what I hoped would be a cool experience in the Pine Barrens. It was awkward at first, just the two of us alone. There was no one else to chime in when the conversation lagged, but I thought it was still going well. We were about 3 miles into the hike when I noticed a strange smell. It was like someone had lit off fireworks in the area. There was a sulfurous haze hanging in the air. She wrinkled her nose up when she smelled it too. She walked past me to get away from the smell, but she jumped back with a yelp. She looked at me wide-eyed and nodded to the trail behind her. A torn-up deer carcass was in the path. I could see drag marks in the sandy soil. It looked like something had purposely dropped the body there. I assumed we scared off whatever predator, maybe a bear or coyotes, from their kill when we got close. We walked another few miles and made camp. Our plan was to walk a different trail that looped back to where we parked in the morning. She brought a small tent. It was summer, so I didn't bother bringing my own. I just tied a tarp up over me in case it rained and set my sleeping bag down. She probably would have let me in the tent, but I didn't want to presume anything. I slept for a few hours, but something woke me up. My skin was prickling, like I was in dry desert heat. The sulfur stench we smelled near the mutilated deer carcass was in the air again, but stronger. My nose and throat felt irritated, like I was breathing in smoke. My eyes adjusted to the darkness and I saw a shape at the edge of the clearing. The shape was large, at least 7 feet tall. It had a long horse-like head and a thin neck. I didn't see much of its body because I was distracted by intense red eyes. My date peeked her head out of her tent to ask me if I smelled sulfur. She followed my gaze to the creature by the tree and gasped. It screeched and leapt into the air and spread bat-like wings. As it flew away, it smashed into a tree branch 20 feet up and sent it crashing down in front of us. I wanted to abandon all my things and start hiking back to the car right then and there, but I knew we wouldn't make it in the dark. I didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night. At first light, we got up to leave. On our way out, we saw the broken branch and the indent left in the soil where the creature took off, and the sandy soil was still warm where the creature stood. I know what I saw, and I know how crazy this sounds. I often wonder if anyone else has ever had an encounter like this. Well, I've sure got a tale to tell you. I'm still processing it in all honesty, and my therapist says it's better to talk about it than to keep it all bottled inside. So I'll start off with a bit about me. My name is Sam, and I'm a junior in college at the University of Maine, studying environmental science and engineering. I'm a big hiker, and I love to get outdoors in any capacity: running, skiing, tubing, fishing, camping, boating, or even bird watching. It is just a peaceful activity for me, and again, my therapist says it's good for me because it gives me some time away from my anxiety and peace and quiet. I wouldn't say I'm too skilled at bird watching, but I've gotten better this last semester because I took a class in ornithology. There are a few main points to birding that I learned. You always need a good pair of binoculars, and a field guide can be your best friend, but your ears can be your most useful tool. Birds make all kinds of different calls depending on what they are trying to communicate. They might call for a mate, or that they've spotted food, or as a warning, or to communicate directions, or to signal danger. Some birds have lots of different calls and sounds and songs, and they usually have a variety of different pitches and vocalizations along with them. I've memorized the most common sounds here in the Northeast and can do a pretty good job matching them up with the correct bird. I've also been out hiking enough to recognize the look of most, depending on if they're a male or female, or a fledgling or an adult or a senior. There's a lot to learn, and I've been determined to learn it all. I've been going out almost every morning on the weekends to see what I can find. Early morning is usually the best time for birding because it's not too hot for them, and some of their predators aren't up yet or have just gone to bed. You know what they say, the early bird gets the worm. I'd been hiking for about a mile in at Moose Point State Park, and I'd seen just about all of the regulars, some dark-eyed juncos, a pair of winter wrens, and a razorbill. It was a busy morning for the birds because it was the day after a big storm. I started to hike up a hill to get a better viewpoint and maybe catch some overstory birds flying by. I found a path that wound up the mountain and took me to a perfect aerial view in a clearing, on some dusty rocks. I sat down and took a breather. It wasn't long before I felt a shadow fly over me. I looked up as quickly as I could, but I didn't see anything in the sky. Then I heard rustling in the trees about 100 yards away. I pulled out my binoculars to try and get a better look. All I could see was a hint of a black wing popping in and out of a massive pine tree. The entire trunk was swaying back and forth as needles and branches flew out in all directions. Suddenly, this creature popped out of the tree line. I thought it could have been a vulture or a raptor or an eagle, maybe an osprey. But the wings were far too large and its face wasn't like a bird at all. In fact, the most shocking thing was that it didn't really have a face at all, only these bright red eyes that were tracking something down below. It had the body of a person almost, but it was covered in a thin layer of black fuzz. Its wings were huge and spread out almost 2 yards wide. I just couldn't believe my eyes. It started to dart down below the trees, and I stood up with my binoculars to follow it. For a while, the whole forest was silent, but then I heard the bawling of a deer. It was certainly a deer crying from pain. The leaves of another tree shook, and then out of a clearing below, this creature came flying by with a doe stuck between its talons. It was a bit off kilter from carrying its weight, but flapped its huge wings smoothly nonetheless. I followed the beast with my binoculars for as long as I could, but eventually it was out of my sight for good. I sat there in shock for a while, and then made my way down the hill to get out of that forest. As I approached the area where the deer got scooped up from, I saw a mess of fallen trees, broken branches, and leaves strewn all about. Certainly a struggle had taken place. I got out of there as quickly as I could and spent the rest of the day Googling what I had seen. Although it seems unlikely to have been this far north, I do believe that I saw what you call a mothman. It certainly was not a normal bird or bat. I'm going to keep my eyes out for more signs of it, but I probably won't be venturing into those woods again on my own. If it could pick up an adult deer, wouldn't it be able to pick me up too? My brother told me about your show. He tunes in a lot. Honestly, I'm new to this sort of thing, but now my curiosity's been piqued after talking to him a bit. I had my own disturbing encounter with a creature everyone says doesn't exist, so I'm finding myself more interested in hearing what other people have seen and what they think about these things. My experience was last September in Kauai, Hawaii, on my honeymoon. For those who don't know, Hawaii has 6 islands you can visit. Most people choose Oahu or Maui for the nightlife and big resorts, but we are nature lovers, so we chose Kauai, which is known as the Garden Isle. One of the major reasons to visit Kauai is to hike the Kalalau Trail. It's pretty rugged. It follows the Na Pali coastline all along the cliffs. The whole trail is 11 miles long one way, and if you're up for that long of a hike, you can camp at the end on Kalalau Beach. Interesting fact, in the 70s there was a hippie community that decided to stay and live in Kalalau Valley at the end of the trail. I can't say I blame them, but the government came in and rousted them and burned down the shelters they'd built. Anyway, we are hikers, but we decided to only do an 8-mile round trip. In 2 miles on the main trail, stop at Hanakapi'ai Beach, then head 2 miles inland to swim at Hanakapi'ai Falls, then hike back out. It was a day trip, and we only had a week to spend. The trail is beautiful, but pretty strenuous for a couple in their 40s. I mean, the views are totally worth it, but we were glad to finally reach the beach and be able to stop and rest. It's a beautiful beach, but after about 15 minutes, I was itching to start exploring. We were wanting to just relax on the sand, so I decided to head down the beach a bit myself to explore some of the caves. There's a really strong riptide on that beach. The locals have put up a sign showing how many visitors have drowned, but it was low tide, so I knew I'd have plenty of time. I walked about a quarter mile down the beach before I got to the first cave. It was really cool to check out, but not very deep. I realized then that I'd forgotten my camera, left it with our gear on the beach, so that kind of sucked. I thought about going back for it, but I decided we'd have plenty of things to take pictures of, once we got to the falls especially. When I came out of the cave, I was about to walk down the beach to the next one, but then I noticed the path. It looked like an animal trail that ran up the cliff beside the first cave. It looked like it ended at a second cave, set about 30 feet above the beach. I should say right here that one of the wonderful things about Hawaii is they have no snakes on land. They do have a poisonous sea snake. So, even though it's a jungle, you don't have to worry about being snake-bitten when you're bushwhacking. It didn't take me long to get to the opening of the upper cave, and the sun was shining in at an angle, which was awesome. It illuminated a little way in, so I didn't have to pull my flashlight from my belt just yet. I had to duck my head to go in, but then the ceiling of the cave raised up a bit and I could almost stand up straight. There was no sign of people having been in there, no graffiti or trash. I walked in a little further and saw it split into 2 chambers. I hesitated at this point because I was afraid she would freak out if I wasn't visible on the beach. But hey, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, right? I unclipped my flashlight and decided to just take a peek around the corner. The chamber on the left dead-ended almost immediately, and it smelled kind of stinky. I backtracked and tried the chamber on the right. When I shone my light over the walls, there was all this sparkly stuff embedded in the rock. Some kind of mineral, I guess, and I was fascinated by it, running the beam over it up and down. I took another step forward. Something hissed at me. I stopped, dead in my tracks, my heart hammering. I pointed the beam down, thinking, oh my God, they were wrong about the snakes, but there was nothing on the cave floor. Another hiss, and I bounced the light wildly up and around, and then I saw it. The eyes first, glinting yellow with black slits for pupils. Then the thing hissed again and advanced, coming fully into the light. I kid you not, it was as tall as I was, with a face like a lizard, a protruding snout like a dragon, and I could see rows of teeth like an alligator has. There were scales all over its body, green in color. It was the scariest thing I've ever seen, standing on 2 legs, with its front legs visible, ending in long black claws. Scared out of my wits, I tried to back up and crashed into solid stone. My blood was like ice in my veins. The thing looked big enough to eat me. I managed to turn myself around and scrambled out of there, stubbing my toe painfully on a rock at the entrance. I didn't care. I raced down the cliff path, almost tumbling down the steep slope, but caught my balance just in time. When I got to the beach, I finally stopped and looked back. It wasn't chasing me. I wonder if it ever came out of the cave while it was daylight. Maybe not. I was afraid to share my encounter. I just said I saw something weird and I don't know what it was, but we're not going into any caves here. My toe was really painful. I think I might have cracked the bone, so we didn't go to the waterfall after all. We spent the rest of our honeymoon enjoying the beaches, not hiking. I did want to point something out real quick. You know, Hanalei isn't far from there, and there's that old song, Puff the Magic Dragon. Even though they pronounce it Hanalei in the song, it was really about Hanalei, Hawaii, which makes me think maybe there was a dragon legend here a long time ago. If there was, maybe it was based on locals seeing this creature, which looked like half lizard, half human.